Welcome to another episode of Wild and Well. Today I'm talking to clinical psychologist, yoga teacher, and author Dr. Lauren Tober. We're going to be talking about all sorts of things, but mainly looking at how she's combined psychology and yoga and how we can use both of these modalities to support ourselves and others when we're feeling stressed or anxious or other emotions that are very common to the human experience.
Mm.
So, welcome, Dr. Lauren. Thank you so much for coming on and spending this time with us. But before we get into the conversation, can we just start by you letting us know one thing that you've done to take care of yourself today?
Oh, well, firstly, thank you for having me here. One thing I've done to take care of myself today, well, what I do nearly every morning is I get up before my kids and I come downstairs and I have a little tea ceremony for myself. So I sit and I make tea, and while the kettle's boiling, it's meditation, but really it's just sitting in stillness and listening to the bubbles of the water as they come. And then I pour tea, and then I pull a card, and then I journal for a little bit. And then, yeah, when it's time to, my kids are getting up and getting off to school, then I go back upstairs and be with them.
And how old are your kids?
They are 13 and 16.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So they're no longer waking me up at 5 a.m. It's more, all right, guys, come on, time to get off to school, off to the bus, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it really changes, doesn't it? From them getting up early to them wanting to sleep in.
Yes. Yeah, it's so different. And yeah, when my kids were little, I loved all the baby stage and the toddler stage. I was like, I never want them to grow up. I love this so much. But now that they're teenagers and my son's much taller than me, my daughter's getting close. I love this as well. I love,
Mm.
having teenagers and the conversations that we have, but I also love how I'm getting myself back and have much more space for myself. I can take an hour in the morning to do this where I couldn't do that for decade.
Yeah. Yeah, it really can shift, can't it?
Hmm.
So, can you share a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do?
Sure. Share a bit about myself. Okay, so I'm a mom. I have two teenage kids, as we spoke about. In terms of my work, I'm a clinical psychologist and a yoga teacher, and I have been integrating these two worlds in different ways for the past over 20 years now. And I have a business called the Yoga Psychology Institute, which I just love and lights my heart up so much, where I teach yoga teachers about mental health. So, how yoga classes can really support the mental health of their students, and then also work with mental health professionals, psychologists, and social workers and counselors about how we can bring yoga into our therapy work yeah, I think yoga is incredible. I think it has such an incredible role to play in contemporary mental health care. So I'm kind of working with yoga teachers and working with therapists, as well as sharing different programs for seekers, people who are practicing yoga and have an interest in that world.
And are you teaching local yoga classes as well?
I'm not anymore. I stopped. I was teaching at a studio called Seeker and Kind here in Mullumbimby in Australia. But I stopped teaching with COVID as the studio closed down. And then the studio opened up after COVID. And just like a week or two later, we had really big floods here. And the studio flooded, and then it opened up again, and then it flooded again. And then the studio closed down. So it was not a great time for that studio. And also, I decided not to go back. Well, did I ever? I'm not sure I decided not to go back ever. I just didn't feel like the time was right. And it's been what, 5 years since COVID now, and I haven't gone back. But what I do teach is mainly teaching online and teaching mainly around training is what I'm doing at the moment.
Mm. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
exciting. I do remember those floods that happened. I used to live in Coffs Harbour for quite some time, and I was
Oh,
there
yes.
when that happened, and everybody was out
Oh
of
no,
power. It was such a massive thing for you guys up there.
it really was. Yeah,
Yeah.
it would have been. Was it down in Coffs Harbour as well?
It was, but not to the same extent where
Not
we
to the same
were.
extent.
So a bit inland from us, they
Yes.
were getting it, but I think you guys got hit a lot harder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really, really traumatizing for the whole community. It's people that, like, I think it's 3 years later, maybe 3.5 years later, like it's people are still recovering from it. It's
Yeah, I
funny, like a
bet.
big incident like that happens. It happens here, but these things happen everywhere in different ways. And we kind of hear about it on the media for a couple of weeks, and everyone's kind of hearts break open and they reach out, and it's incredible. And then there's the rebuilding, like years and years after.
Yeah, and the news has moved on long ago, right? They don't go back to
Totally.
that.
No.
So, what led you to integrate yoga and psychology in your work? I think that this is so important and so needed. And as a clinical psychologist myself and a former yoga teacher, I absolutely love when people are combining these. So that's what
Mm.
really drew me to your work. But can you explain like what
Ah.
led to this combining?
Whenever I ask this question, I can come up with a reason for it, but the real reason of it, I just wanted to. I just felt this pull to bring these worlds together. I went to my first yoga class when I was at university. I was on a university exchange student in Canada, in Vancouver. And I went to a yoga class at the downtown community center there. And I just had this, well, there was part of me that was like, this is really strange. Like this was maybe 25 years ago, and there, wasn't so much yoga, and this was a Kundalini yoga class. So it was kind of out there. And part of me was like, this is so strange and this is so hard. Like it was physically challenging. What am I doing here? And then another part of me was like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. I don't know what this is, but I got to keep doing this. So I started yoga while I was studying psychology. And so they both kind of progressed together. But right from that very class, there was this knowing that this is something that I wanted to keep doing, and maybe to integrate into the work that I was doing. I wasn't a psychologist yet. I didn't know how they would come together, but I just had this sense of this is what I wanted to do. And so I just continued along this path. At the time, I didn't know anyone that was doing this. Like now, there is so many more mental health professionals who are bringing yoga into their work, and I find that so exciting. And you're one of them, it sounds like. But at the time, I didn't know anyone who was doing it. I didn't know how it could possibly happen. But I just had this sense of this is something that I wanted to do. And yoga has been incredible in my own life, and it just made sense to me to bring it into my work.
Yeah, they seem to go really hand in hand in my opinion.
Agreed.
And what does this integration look like? I know that's probably another massive question, but just to give us some idea, what does that actually look like?
Well, it looks different for everyone. And I'm running this yoga psychology mentorship at the moment. And we just had a call this morning. I just got off the call a few minutes before we were recording this. And, I created it because more and more I get this question. And particularly in supervision, psychologists and other therapists will come to supervision and they want to bring yoga in. They ask me this question. And so, as part of the mentorship, I've interviewed, I don't even know, maybe 10 or more different health professionals from around the world who are integrating yoga. And I asked them this question that you're asking me, how do you do it? And I've loved hearing everybody's answers to this question because everyone does it in a different way. The way that I do it personally is I bring in my therapy practice, where I work as a clinical psychologist, I bring some yoga into it, but I'm primarily a psychologist, and I work within the kind of ethical framework and guidelines that we have as psychologists, things like has evidence-based practice and the different things, different, models that we're expected to use. But there are ways that we can bring yoga into that and still work within the framework as a psychologist. Usually it's around pranayama, like we call it pranayama in yoga, we call it breath retraining in psychology. So the breath can be a really powerful vehicle for self-understanding and also about regulating the nervous system. Yoga is a practice of self-inquiry, getting to know ourselves, and what else is psychology if not getting to know ourselves. And yoga also has these incredible practices around nervous system regulation. So a big part of the way that I bring it into therapy work is around understanding the nervous system. So in psychology, we often talk about the window of tolerance model, which is about the kind of arousal of the autonomic nervous system. Ideally, for those who haven't heard about the window of tolerance, We want to, when we're within our window of tolerance, our nervous systems are regulated, our emotions are manageable. Basically, we can do life, right? There's ups and downs, but we feel like we can do life. When we're outside of our window of tolerance, we might be hyper aroused, so we might be activated, angry, manic, this kind of overwhelmed, upregulated state, or we might be hypo aroused, which is more this downregulated, depressed, flat, frozen. So the hyper aroused is this kind of fight or flight, and the hypo aroused is this kind of freeze state. And yoga fits in really nicely with this model of as well. In yoga, we talk about the gunas. So sattva is this window of tolerance, and rajas is more like this hyper or this fight or flight state, and tamas is more this freeze state or this down-regulated state. So I really like to overlay these models of the window of tolerance and the gunas, and then once we've kind of established where we are on these models, we can use different yogic practices or anything really to help us to cultivate more of a sattvic state or come more within our window of tolerance.
Yeah, fascinating. And when you were
That was a
saying
lot of
that,
information in one.
no, it just
Sentence.
reminds me that, like, within psychology itself, even if we set aside yoga for a second, in psychology, there's all these different types of therapies, but they're
Mhm.
all doing very similar things, even if maybe there's disagreement about that, like some saying, oh no, this one is more effective or that one is. Really,
Mhm.
you can overlay them and they're doing very similar things, aren't they? They just have
Mhm.
different names to it. So from what you're
Kind of
saying, it
different.
sounds like yoga is similar.
Yeah, I remember when I was doing my doctoral studies, I asked one of the professors, like, which therapy should we use for who, whether that's related to diagnosis or whatever it is. Which is the best one for which presentation. And actually, when you look now, there is different evidence-based practices for different presentations. But what he said that really struck me was that it doesn't matter. It's the relationship that's the most important ingredient in therapy. And so the actual type of therapy you use is less important than the relational piece, the relationship that you have with your therapist or with your yoga teacher, or whatever it is, that relationship is powerful.
Mhm. What exactly is mental health aware yoga?
Mhm. So mental health aware yoga is a phrase that I came up with to describe teaching in a way that's supportive of students with mental health challenges or our own mental health challenges. I think a lot of people, well, I don't think I know, a lot of people are going to yoga for mental health reasons. There was a study that was done, it was like 20 years ago now. A guy called Stephen Penman did his PhD research on, I think it was called something like the state of yoga in Australia. And he looked at all the different reasons that people were practicing yoga. This was like one part of his thesis. And what he found was that, oh, I'm going to mess up the stats now, but it was around I think around 60% of people started yoga for mental health reasons, and nearly 80% was like 79.4% of people continued to practice yoga for mental health reasons. That was 20 years ago. It's probably even more now as the awareness of yoga and the awareness of the stigma around mental health is reducing. So people are coming to yoga for mental health reasons, right? And maybe you listeners listening in, if they practice yoga, maybe that feels true for them as well. One of the reasons they practice yoga is just if support with their mental health. It's true for me as well. But yoga teachers aren't taught much about mental health. We do these kind of 200-hour teacher training courses. Nowadays, people are more aware of it. They might do like an hour on trauma-informed yoga, for example. But yoga teachers aren't taught about how to support the mental health of their students yet. 80%, nearly 80% of their students are coming to yoga for mental health reasons. So I was teaching these yoga classes, yoga for depression, yoga for anxiety, that were really tailored around depression and anxiety. But what I really started to realize was that while I do think there is a time and a place for specialized mental health classes, every yoga class really needs to be supportive of people's mental health, because that's why people were there. And really, what I was teaching was actually not that different than what you would teach in a well-rounded mental health aware yoga class. And so I thought, okay, I can teach these classes and we have 10 people in a class at a time, or I can teach yoga teachers these principles about how to support their students experiencing mental health challenges. And that's how mental health aware yoga was born. So we've been teaching these trainings since 2019, and I just brought out a book last year about mental health aware yoga because I think yoga is incredible for mental health. I think yoga teachers are incredible in the way that they hold space and their desire to really show up and be supportive for their students. I just wanted to give them the tools on how they can more deeply support their students' mental health.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear about that study because a lot of the time people do start yoga or they talk about why they started it. It was for like the asanas and the movement and like that physical
Mm-hmm.
exercise, but they tend to stay for the mindfulness and the
Yeah.
connection to self and all the psychological parts that come with that. So that study makes a lot of sense that it
Yeah.
increases.
And it really speaks to the kind of the embodied experience of yoga. You try it out and then it's like, this has, it's different for everyone, but this has some kind of effect on my system. So I want to keep doing it.
Yeah, yeah, it really does. So, how can practices from yoga and psychology help us to regulate and ground ourselves, especially as mothers, but just people in general, really, because it's probably not that different when we are feeling stressed or overwhelmed or anxious, like if we are in that, I guess, hyper arousal state.
Mhm, mhm.
Anything that you recommend that's kind of tangible for
Ah,
listeners?
yoga has so many incredible practice. Like the practices are only one small part of yoga, right? As I'm sure you know. But that part is incredible. Yoga gives us such amazing practices to help us to regulate our nervous system. So many of the practices of yoga is designed to help us to cultivate what I mentioned before is sattva. So in yoga we call that sattva. This is this calm, equanimity, peaceful, wise. In polyvagal theory, we might call this safe and social state. And this is ideally where we want to be. So these practices are actually designed to support us to cultivate more sattva, to come within our window of tolerance, but they're also designed to help us to recognize where we are. So there's kind of two parts to yoga practices. Is one to check in with ourselves where we are in this moment. And I think that this is a really important thing to do before we do any kind of practices trying to change our state, is to pause and to notice where we are. And so we might be activated, like your example was, when we're hypo aroused, or we might be like flat or heavy or tamasic or hypo aroused, or we might be within our window of tolerance. But what's really important is that we take our internal temperature, so to speak. We stop and we say, how am I traveling? Am I more upregulated or downregulated, or am I just in this sweet spot? And this in itself can be regulating, right? Like when we take a moment to pause, maybe we take a couple of breaths, we tune in. But so often I think we forget to do that. We do that for our kids, especially when our kids are younger. Kids are very, in my experience, are the most incredible, wonderful, best thing in the world that I've ever done. And they're very activating for the nervous system. They're noisy, they have so many needs. The needs never stop. They're always coming, and you might fall asleep, but then someone will like shake you awake at 3 a.m. It's a lot on our nervous systems, and especially if we're highly sensitive parents, we feel that a lot. And so taking the time to pause and tune in and say, okay, where am I at now? And be really honest with that. No judgment, no criticism, just a compassionate curiosity to where we are in that moment. And that in itself can sometimes be enough, but then we can ask the question, okay, what do I need? And so sometimes, I don't know, when my kids were young, it was like I need a nap most of the time. And I think that I did a lot of yoga nidra naps when my kids were young. Sometimes it was yoga nidra, sometimes it was actually falling asleep. But that is exactly what I needed at that time. So first it's the checking in, and then it's the asking, well, what do I need? And sometimes it's a yoga practice, and sometimes it's a sleep or a walk on the beach, or I actually need some help. I need like a cleaner or a nanny, or I need someone to come over so I can have a shower. But sometimes it's a yoga practice. And if we think about this model that I talked about before, either the window of tolerance or the gunas, or even like, am I feeling upregulated, anxious? Is my heart racing? Am I feeling like, am I going a million miles an hour? Then we need something that's going to help us to calm down. And often in the world that we live in, that's often where we most are. But sometimes we're feeling flat or exhausted or shut down or dissociated or in this kind of freeze state. And then we might need some practices to support us to upregulate. And so we want to figure out where we are, and then we want to figure out what we need to bring us back to this sattvic state or this optimal zone of arousal.
Yeah, that's such a good starting point with that check-in of where am I at? Because you're so right. When we can just take that pause and ask a question like that, it can
Mm,
really shift so much and is often all we need. And then that
mm,
next part of checking in to see, okay, well, what do I need? That was
mm-hmm.
so transformative in my own motherhood experience
Yeah.
because I think we can go through life before having kids, or at least in my own experience, I could get through life not being very clear on my needs.
Mm-hmm.
But once I had kids, you forget so much about your needs. You become even more disconnected from them,
Yeah.
that it's so important to come back and just ask those questions. And sometimes it is really simple. Like the answer might be, like you say, have a nap or do yoga nidra. I found for myself a lot of the time it was, I just need to have an adult conversation, or I just need a
Yeah.
glass of water, like really simple, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if,
So, yeah, where am I at? What do I need?
yeah,
And then if you're looking for a yoga practice, a very simple one that's thrown around a lot, but do not be put off by its simplicity, is to breathe into your belly. And this can
mm,
be down regulating if you're feeling kind of activated. It can also be up regulating if you're feeling more hypo aroused. So even if you don't know what you need, because sometimes we don't know what we need, right?
yeah.
Like we're so tired or we're so discombobulated by the day, we actually don't know what we need. And so this could be a really great go-to practice wherever you are, or if you don't know what you need. Take a hand, put it on your belly, and sense the feeling of the breath in your abdomen. And as best you can, see if your belly can move. Your breath actually doesn't go into your belly, but you can feel as you inhale, usually the belly gently expands, and as you exhale, it gently releases. And if you can take just a moment to pause and breathe. If you're breastfeeding, maybe your baby is resting against your belly, and so you can feel the movement of your belly on your baby. And actually, this will be really calming for the baby as well. I'm just doing it now. I'm like, oh, I don't want to stop. Let me demonstrate this for the next 20 minutes. No, I'm not going to do that. But perhaps if you're listening in, maybe you want to pause the podcast and try it for yourself. It is so simple, but it's not always easy. But don't be kind of put off by the simplicity of it. This is one of the most sweet, powerful, accessible practices that we can do. And if you don't want to put your hand on your belly, or you can't feel the breath in your belly, you can put your hand on your rib cage, on the side, or on your chest. Anywhere you can feel the movement of the breath in your body.
Yeah, it is so nice. I was doing that alongside you. And it just,
Mm,
even though I didn't feel that, um, like, I guess, hyper aroused before, I do just feel my nervous system calming down in the moment. It's
mm,
incredible that taking just a few breaths, we're breathing all the time. And yet
yeah,
by doing that, it changes everything, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah. I think this practice in particular, it helps to anchor us into this present moment rather than thinking about what's going to happen, or all the long list of to do things you have to do for the day, or things, or feeling worried about things that happened in the past. So it helps to anchor us into this moment. It also, by putting your hand on your body, it also helps to bring us into our bodies instead of, because
Mm.
so often we're so up in our heads, we're thinking about things, we're analyzing things, we're, worried about what this means or what's going to happen next. But it brings us into our body. And there's so much wisdom in our body. It also helps us to slow down the breath, even though I didn't give any instructions on slowing down the breath. By resting our attention gently on the breath, it can help to slow it down. And so, kind of a fast, breath up in our chest is more associated with like this fight or flight response. And so when we put our hands on our belly and we become aware of our breath, it can help to slow down our breath, which kind of brings us more into this rest and digest state, the relaxation state, which ideally this is where we want to be hanging out most of the time. Not all the time. We do need this fight or flight state at times, but most of the time we want to be hanging out in this rest and digest, this parasympathetically engaged or this sattvic state. And breathing in this way can really support that. And we don't need any fancy yoga gear. You can do it in whatever you're wearing. You don't need any kind of like mats or props or anything. You can do it in the supermarket. You can do it, in the middle of sitting on the floor with Lego all around you. You can access it anywhere. It's always there. It's this incredible internal somatic resource that we can access whenever we need to.
Yeah, the breath is amazing, how transformative it is. What do you recommend in terms of other breath techniques or pranayamas? Like, I find sometimes personally, if I'm feeling really heightened and my kids are too, sometimes like together, I get us to do like more of like a lion breath or something like that. That's like
Mm,
really like big and energetic, almost to release some of that
mm,
intensity of emotion. And I think when I do it with my kids, it's kind of fun too. So it lightens the mood.
nice.
Do you have any recommendations around things like that? Like, do you
Yeah.
suggest that for people? Do you find that's effective as well?
Yeah. How old are your kids? I'm curious.
They are 6 and 8.
6 and 8. Great. Oh, what a sweet age.
Hmm.
What I really heard in what you said, and I think is so important, and this is one of the key principles in mental health or yoga, is to meet yourself where you are, or meet your kids where they are, or meet your students where they are. And so by having a noisy exhalation, when you're feeling this kind of activated state, can be really helpful. I don't know, like if you've ever been anxious or somebody listening in has ever been anxious and someone tells you, just take a deep breath, just breathe, you kind of want to strangle them, right? Like it's not at all helpful. It doesn't work if you're really if you're really activated and overwhelmed. Taking a deep breath is just going to make you annoyed. It's actually not really, it's not really going to help. And so we want to meet ourselves where we are, or if our kids are bouncing off the walls, we want to meet our kids where they are. You might, if your kids are like running around and being really noisy, you're not going to be able to get them to lie down and breathe like that. Is they're going to wriggle and jiggle and scream and like jump up after 2 seconds. Like it's not going to work. But if you do, like you suggested, take a big noisy out breath together, you're going to meet that kind of activated energy where it is, and then gently start to calm it down. So I think we can do this for ourselves, and we can share this with our kids. So I love that one. We can take a big inhale through the nose and a big noisy exhale through the mouth. And if you're doing it with your kids, they could roar, or, I'm not going to do this into the podcast mic here, but you can do that however you like. And then what you could do, if you could do this yourself, you could kind of do it with your kids as well, is see if, like, do it a few times and each time make it more and more subtle until the last one is how quiet can you make it? And a really quiet exhalation. So if you're doing it with your kids, you're turning it into kind of a game. If you're doing it with yourself, you're starting from quite a strong place, from a gross place, and making it more and more subtle as you go on. Another way that I like to share this with kids, and you can do it together as a family, is probably you want to start with a practice like that if they're really activated. But then once there's a level of sattva or a level of calm, you can all lie down on the floor, and you can get a balloon or you can get a teddy bear and put it on your belly, and you're all kind of lying there together with your teddy bears on your belly, and you move your on your belly like the waves of the ocean. So you might imagine, like, as you inhale and exhale, your belly moves and the teddy bear goes for a bit of a imagine it's on a boat and it's on the waves of the ocean, or the balloon, whatever it is, whatever works for your kids. But again, we're bringing the attention back into the belly, and we're slowing the breath down in that way. And I think that can be fun, can be a great way to connect. But we're also giving our kids tools that they can use later, because what we really want to do for us and for our kids is practice this stuff when we're feeling okay. if we only do a breath practice, and this is the mistake that I see most in therapy, if we only do a breath practice when we're feeling anxious, then it's probably not going to work. And we're going to think, oh, this breath stuff is rubbish. It doesn't work. Every psychologist tells me this, I'm not going to do it. But actually, what we really need to do, I think, to be effective is we need to be practicing these when we're feeling regulated, when we're feeling okay. So then we get that kind of felt experience in our body of what this feels like. And so not only when we do the practice later, we get the practice, we also get that kind of somatic memory of what it's like to feel okay from doing that practice. But also, so we've practiced it a lot and it's much more accessible. If we only do this stuff when we're feeling dysregulated, it's going to be very hard to remember what to do. And yeah, it's probably not going to be very effective. So if we can practice these things ourselves, when we're feeling regulated, then we can access them more easily, or our kids can access them more easily as well if they need them.
Yeah, 100%. It's hard to do anything that's useful if you haven't built up that habit when you are feeling really
Exactly.
heightened.
Yeah, because
What
when we are heightened, what also happens is our prefrontal cortex is not online in the same way as when we're
Mhm.
relaxed. So it's hard to, you want to do something for the first time or when you're feeling dysregulated because your brain is just not working in the way that it does when you're relaxed. So you want to really have the felt, lived, embodied experience of that in your system, and then you can access it when you need to.
And what do you recommend for people? Because I absolutely agree with what you're saying, but when people are feeling okay and they are in that window of tolerance and they are less likely to remember to practice it versus when we get heightened or we get so exhausted when we need it, we might think, oh, that there's that breathing thing I'm supposed to do. What do
Mm-hmm.
you suggest people do to anchor it into their day to day so they do build up that habit?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, to anchor it into your day. And I think it's important to recognize that this doesn't have to be a big thing. Like we go to a yoga class and we spend an hour or an hour and a half practicing, and that can be great. But we can just spend a couple of minutes doing this. It doesn't actually have to take very much time in your life. And one way that I find really helpful is to, like you said, like anchor it or attach it to something else that we're doing in our life. So it could be, for example, when you go to bed, before you go to sleep, you take 10 breaths, 10 abdominal breaths. Or it might be when you sit on the toilet, you do it then. Or maybe one way that I like to do it, like when I'm in the car, when I get home, before I go inside. Like that's a time of transition that I can put that in. I used to have a really old computer and it used to have that, the Macs have that, I call it the wheel of death, that little wheel that goes around. I started to say, okay, every time that goes, because I'm kind of an impatient person and that used to annoy me. I was like, okay, that's coming up to remind me to breathe. And so I would do my breath practices for as long as that wheel. I have a newer computer now, it doesn't happen anymore. But it's more about how can we find these little, places in our life that we can add it into. And I think either first thing in the morning or last thing before bed can be a good way. Or, when you're doing something like brushing your teeth or going to the toilet, you can put that in there as well. If you've got little kids and it's hard to get a moment to yourself, maybe you can do it on the toilet or in the shower or when you're breastfeeding can be another or feeding in any way can be another way to do that. You can also bring it into your family life as well. I've found in my from my own personal experience and working with a lot of mums is that we tend to put our kids' needs before our own. And so can we utilize that tendency and say, all right, so we're going to do family breath practices. I'm doing this for my kids, and then we get the benefit of it as well. So we might or get out our yoga mats. Or when I used to teach kids yoga many years ago, I had all these carpet squares. You can get these kind of carpet offcuts from carpet shops sometime, all different colors, and we used to put them out on the floor. And then every kid has their own mat. If you don't have yoga mats, you might try these carpet squares, or you might have a rug. Everyone has their own little space. You lie down together and you do a breath practice together, and you could get something online that you do recording, or you can guide your kids through it, but make it a family activity.
I think you're so right there that moms put their kids' needs first. So if we can combine that, taking care of
Yeah,
ourselves and them, I'm all
yeah,
for it. And yeah, so much of the work I do is making that combination. So we're
Mm.
meeting everybody's
Oh,
needs for myself
beautiful.
and for clients. I think it's just more manageable that way. It's only one more thing to do, not one more thing
Yeah.
for me and one more thing for them. It's all
Yeah.
together. And it's so much more
Yeah.
fun, isn't it?
It's can be really fun. And the kids might be up for it or they might not be, but I think it's beautiful to be planting these seeds when they're young. And maybe
Yeah.
maybe they won't continue it. Like I have teenagers now, they are not interested in yoga and meditation at all, but I feel really good that I planted that seed and I'm kind of imagining one day maybe in their 20s or 30s, I'll be like, oh yeah, what was that thing that I did with, oh, okay. And it'll come back to them then.
Mhm. Another good time of the day to do this would be when you're helping your kids go to sleep, doing those breaths, right? To help them to
Beautiful.
fall off to sleep and then for us to calm our
Absolutely.
nervous system.
Yeah, I used to do this little yoga nidra meditation with my kids. So I would adapt yoga nidra. So often in a yoga nidra, we do a body scan practice, and it's bringing attention and noticing sensation in different parts of the body. And so I would do this with my kids. They didn't realize it was any kind of practice. They thought I was just helping them get off to sleep. And we'd start with the toes and move upwards because that supposedly helps with sleep. And we'd start with sleepy toes, sleepy toes. And they kind of move through the body, and each part of the body would be like a sleepy part of the body. And that for whatever reason, that would help them fall off to sleep. And yeah, it would calm us all down as we're doing that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I might try that tonight. We're recording it in the evening, so I will remember that for sure.
Nice. A sleepy toes meditation.
Yeah. So, can you talk to us about self-compassion? This is so important, I think, for everybody. And because this podcast is more focused on mothers, like it's obviously very important for moms as well. We can be so hard on ourselves, and that doesn't
Yeah.
help us or our kids. But yeah, tell us about self-compassion.
Self-compassion. I really feel like this underpins so much of the struggles that we have. I think particularly here in the West, we're so hard on ourselves, and mothers are so hard on themselves. We speak to ourselves in ways we would never speak to somebody else. The kind of things that we say to ourselves, if we said them to anybody else, they would be shocked. If somebody ever said the things that we say to ourselves to us, we probably wouldn't want to be friends with them anymore. At least I hope we wouldn't. But yet we can be
Yeah.
so mean to ourselves. And starting to look at this can be quite confronting when you realize the extent of it, but it can be so, so life changing. So, the invitation really is to start to notice your internal dialogue, to notice the way that you speak to yourself. Often it's things like, oh, I'm such an idiot, or that was so stupid. These are kind of classic things that we might say. We also might have comments about our body and, how we're measuring up to other people. Comparison can be a big thing. But start to notice the way that you speak to yourself. Don't be surprised if it's worse than you thought it was. I think it can be quite shocking sometimes when we start to look at this, and then we need to bring self-compassion because we're not being very compassionate. But once we see it, then we can do something about it. We can start to change the way that we speak to ourselves and also the way that we act towards ourselves. And so when we do this, I think there's two different things to look at. One is what we might call words of compassion and acts of compassion. So we can start to speak to ourselves more nicely, and then we can start to act towards ourselves in ways that are more compassionate and loving. Um, I think we develop a habit of having an inner critic, and any habit we can change. It just requires repetition to change it. My favorite way to start cultivating, can I share it with you? My favorite way to start cultivating more compassion is to say good night to yourself lovingly before you go to bed. So, this is a practice, it doesn't take very long. And when I first started doing it, I felt like such an idiot. I was like, oh my goodness, I can't talk to myself in this way. Like, in Australia, we have this kind of tall poppy syndrome. Like, we always try to put ourselves down and not lift ourselves up. I think it's different in different cultures, but here in Australia, we don't tend to like lift ourselves up. We tend to put ourselves down. And so it felt very, very awkward for me when I started doing this. But I've been doing it for many, many years, and now it feels very natural and it feels so loving and so sweet. So it goes like this. When you go to bed, you say goodnight to yourself in a loving way. And you might think about how you say goodnight to your children. So when I started doing this, my children were very, very young. And I used to, I realized what I said without even thinking about it. I would say, "Good night, my love. I love you." And I would stroke their little faces, like across their forehead and down their nose and on their cheeks. So I was like, okay, this is how I say goodnight to my children. This is how I'm going to say goodnight to myself. And at first I was like, I don't want to do this. Like, no, 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 I have to do this. You can't tell people to do this and not do it yourself, right? Okay, this is one of the hard things about being a psychologist, right? You have to practice what you preach. And so I started to do it every night. I would say, "Good night, my love. I love you." And I would stroke across my forehead and down my nose the same way I would do with my very little children at the time. And it was excruciating to begin with. And then it became easier and easier and easier. And now I do it without even thinking. And there's two parts of it, right? There's the words of self-compassion. "Good night, my love. I love you." And the second part is the acting in a compassionate way. So it was, at the time, it was stroking the face. Now I'm more likely to put a hand on my heart and a hand on my belly when I say it. But there's this kind of move like compassionate kind of movement that you do that. And so it doesn't just stay in the cognitive intellectual level. It also has an embodied somatic feel to it as well. And, I share this a lot with clients, and many of them have that same kind of look on their face that I felt when I started it. But those that are willing to stick at it, it really can really make a difference.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And it's so nice to hear what people actually do because we can talk a lot about these things, but like you say, that can just keep us in our heads and we can be cognitive with that. But to know what people
I'm
do and have that body experience, that's so important.
Yeah. And I'm so good at that. I think so many of us are good at having an intellectual understanding of it, but
Hmm.
living it is very different, right? We can think,
Yeah.
yeah, I should be compassionate and I should love myself, but what does that actually look like? And how do I actually do that? So having these practices, I think, can be really helpful. There's a lady called Dr. I don't know if it's Kirsten Neff, who
Mm.
does some incredible work about self-compassion. So if you're interested, check her out. A friend of mine, also Belinda Hahn, she created these self-compassion cards for mothers that are an incredible resource. I interviewed her on my podcast earlier in the year, and she has these cards that are really supportive for moms to bring more self-compassion into their day.
I could see how cards could be helpful because it's something tangible and it's not coming from yourself. So maybe there's less of that ick that you were feeling in that initially.
Yeah, oh, ick, that's a good word for
Yeah.
it.
And you don't have to come
Yeah,
up with it yourself, do you? It's just picking up the card and reading it, and that
yeah,
guides you.
yeah. Yeah, and the other way, which Dr. Neff points out that I shared here, is this thinking about how you would speak to somebody else, like, and using that language. So whether, often that's a child, or it could be your pet or your lover, like anyone, the kind of the sweetness of the language that you use to say goodnight to somebody else. Can you bring that sweetness? It's not just the word, it's the words, it's that sweetness and intention you bring to it. So I didn't even know I was saying goodnight to my kids in that way. I just kind of did. And then I started to pay attention. And I was like, okay, I'm going to use that for myself. And then we get that felt experience of it. And we also kind of get to reparent ourselves in doing that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So if there's a mom listening to this and she's interested in learning more about mental health aware yoga and the training that you're doing in your book, can you just tell us a little bit more about all of these and the different ways that people can learn more from you and work with you?
I'd love to. Thank you. Yeah, so the best way is to go to the Yoga Psychology Institute website. So that's just Yoga Psychology Institute. psychologist.com. And we've got all the different programs that we have there, the trainings for yoga teachers and for health professionals. And then we also have different courses on there as well. I do have a free yoga nidra meditation on there as well.
Mm.
I can't remember the link. It might be yogapsychologyinstitute.com/yoga nidra or yoga dash nidra, but maybe I can send it to you and you can put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
Really, yoga nidra saved my life. I think when I had young children, I had two kids under the age of 3, and it was, you know, beautiful and intense and all the things. And really, what got me through those young years was yoga nidra practice. So I love yoga nidra myself. I love sharing it with people. We'll share this free meditation with you. And if you'd like to try it, please do. When my kids were young, my husband was working from home. I'd taken time off work, and in his lunch break every day, I would say, "Your turn," and give him the kids, and I would go and lie down and do a yoga nidra practice every single lunch break, every single day. And it just helped me to get through the rest of the day. And like I said, sometimes I slept through it, sometimes I did the full yoga nidra practice, but either way, it was just what I needed in those early days.
Yeah, they say that yoga nidra is like having a nap for a couple hours. Like it's so restorative. So I don't know what like the exact research is on it, but it is really, really powerful, isn't it?
It is. I don't think there's any research in it replacing sleep. And people say that, and I'm always wary of that because I don't think it should replace sleep, particularly
No.
because in our society, we're so chronically sleep deprived. But it can be, yeah, definitely supportive if you're having trouble sleeping. It help you to sleep. And yeah, just to come home to yourself, come back to yourself, into your own energy, to rest.
Yeah.
I think it's really powerful. That would be, yeah, it's an incredible practice for parents, for
Yeah, and
anyone,
I agree
but
with you. Nothing
parents.
replaces sleep. It's so important. In my second book, one of my chapters is all about sleep, and I talk about ways to get better sleep and then ways to get more sleep. And then sometimes as a new mom, like there's just no way to get good sleep or more sleep. So there's these ways to just like do what you can to
Yeah,
just feel better. And yoga nidra is where I put that because it's sometimes you just can't get the sleep, but you could fit that in and
yeah,
it can just give you something.
yeah. 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 So if you have somebody else who can take care of your kids while you do that practice, that's great. I had this like one window in the day that worked for
Mm.
me. If your kids are napping and you can do it in there, great. You can also get like kids yoga nidra practices. You could all do it together if you don't have anyone to support you to do that. If you wake up in the night but your kids are asleep, you can do it. You can do a yoga nidra practice in the nighttime.
Mm.
We tried this thing with our kids, and I'm still to this day surprised that it worked, but it did. Is putting a timer outside the bedroom so the kids could see I think it was my husband's phone, and it just had a countdown timer, and it was like, okay, we're going in and we're doing the practice, and they could see the countdown timer on the. Also, we never had devices, so it was probably exciting for them to look at it, but they could see the timer, and they gave us a little bit of space to do a practice like this. um, I'm still amazed that it worked, but it worked. So there's, different ways that people find that can work in their families to get these little pieces of space, because rest, always, but particularly in the early years of parenting, is sometimes can be hard to get, but is so important.
Mhm. Yeah, and if you're creative, like you were with that instant, yeah, you can fit it in, you can make it work.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
your book, who is this for? Like, who is the ideal reader for this book?
The book is written for yoga teachers. And so it's designed to give yoga teachers some ideas about how they can support their students experiencing mental health challenges in their classes, and how they can, set up their classes. People that aren't yoga teachers have read it as well, but really it's designed for yoga teachers. I think maybe my next book will be for more of the general public, and how we can
Mm.
use yoga to support our mental health. Perhaps we'll see. But this book, yeah, specifically is for yoga teachers.
Yeah, that
Mm.
sounds great. And that second book sounds so needed as well. So please write
Mm.
that.
Oh, thank you. You know, it was always my dream to write a book, and it was very, it took me 5 years to write this book. It's just a little, it's just a little book. Um, yeah, but it was such a joy to write it.
Yeah, amazing. And can you let people know where they can find you, find your book? You
Yeah.
already mentioned the program, like the course and everything. How they can work with
Mm.
you. Is that the best website for you then?
Yeah, so the yogapsychologyinstitute.com is kind of where everything is. If you want to
Okay.
go straight to the book, it's mentalhealthawareyoga.com/book. And then I'm also on Instagram and Facebook. It's Yoga Psychology Institute as one account, and then I also have Dr. Lauren Tober as a is another account. I don't know why I have so many accounts, but it's just kind of how it how it works out. And also we'll put the link to the Yoga Nidra practice as well. So if you want to try Yoga Nidra practice, yeah, try it. Those are a lifesaver. I highly recommend it.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you for all the work that you're doing. I think it's so
Mm,
needed. The more that we can integrate these modalities and have more people benefiting from them, the better. So thank you for training up so many people, as well as writing your book, having your podcast, and sharing this time
mm.
with us on my
Thank you.
podcast.
I guess one more thing to say is if someone's looking for a yoga teacher who understands mental health, we have a
Mm.
directory on the website, on the mentalhealthawareyoga.com website as well. So you can, wherever you are in the world, we have incredible teachers all over the world that have taken the training and doing some beautiful things. So you can find a teacher to support you.
Oh, that's great. That's really good to know. I didn't realize that. That's brilliant.
Mm,
Well,
great.
thank you so much.
Thank you. What a joy.